Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson and welcome to my YouTube channel Remembering Love. The subject of today's video is why thoughts are overrated, I think. And what I'd like to explore in this video is the role thoughts play in our lives, the dominance of how much thought plays in how we experience life. And if thinking is overrated, if thinking isn't the only means and mechanisms and filter through which we experience ourselves in the world, well, what are our alternatives? And what does life look like outside of thinking? And that's what I'd really like to explore in this video. So to do that, we're going to go through a number of different things. First of all, the place thought has in our lives, the dominance of thought and why that is. How do we understand thoughts without thinking? And what are alternative and other ways and modes of being outside of our thought process? And we'll look at that at the end. So when we look at the dominance of thought, I would say for my life, and I think my experience is pretty common, I live a lot of my life, or the majority, whether it's 97 or 99% of my life, in my thoughts. I'm very much a thinking person, and even though I'm very emotional and I have a lot of physical, obviously, experiences of being hungry and I have physical sensations, even those physical sensations are experienced through the lens of what I think and what I experience. So my emotions, my physical sensations are all processed through a kind of a thinking mode that I'm in a lot of the time, and there's occasional breaks to that, but more or less I am in my head thinking about stuff all the time. Now there are different types of thinking. There's analytical thinking, there's calculated thinking, there's imagination thinking. I mean, thinking isn't just one sort of homogeneous thing. It's broken down and divided into different parts. But more or less thinking is that process of constructing words, having conversations. Sometimes they're external, sometimes they're internal, but it's the words that go on in our mind and all the emotions and feelings that are attached to that. And that is our thinking process. Now supposedly we have 40,000 thoughts a day. And over a week, that's a lot. Over a year, it's a lot. I'll put the number up on the screen here. But a question to ask is how much of my time is spent in thinking? And as I said, I think it's the majority for most of us. And we're a very head-dominated culture. When people kill themselves, they don't shoot themselves in the heart. They literally kind of blow their head off in that regards. So there's this sense of our life is in our head, that we experience things in our head. And I think it's worth asking the question, well, is that just the way it is? Like, is thinking about things all the time and filtering our experience of feeling and physical sensation through the mode of our thinking process, is that just the way it is? Or is that one way of being? And in my experience, that isn't just the way it is, that there are other modes and means to relate and understand ourselves in the world outside of the thinking process. Yet an interesting question arises when we come to look at thinking and to really understand thinking. Can our thoughts understand our thoughts? Can a thing really understand itself? So when I want to look at my eye, obviously my eye can't look at my eye. So the only way I can really see my eye is in a reflection in a mirror or a camera. And even then, it's still my eye looking at that reflection. And that reflection isn't my eye, it's a reflection of my eye. And the accuracy of that reflection is going to be determined by, is there curves in the mirror, is there dust in the mirror, is there dust in my eye, the thing that's looking. So when we look at a thing looking at itself, it is problematic. So when we think about our thoughts, we're still in the thing itself. So we end up with this conundrum that to really understand our thoughts, we can't think about our thoughts. We have to experience our thoughts outside of this process of thinking. The famous, I don't know if he's a mystic or a famous spiritual teacher, Krishnamurti, had this thing that human thoughts cannot solve a problem because human thoughts are the problem. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, I can't even think about that. To think about that sentence, I'm doing the very thing the sentence is kind of saying is a problem. So what do I do? How do I understand that without thinking? And it's really difficult because that process of thinking and analyzing and categorizing and determining, it's so much just the way I am. It's very hard to grasp anything outside of that. And I can't even think about that fact. So what we're left with is, what are the experiences outside of our thoughts? And what I see is most of us do struggle with this. When we feel so top heavy, when we feel like we're so in our thoughts, we find ways to get out of our thoughts. And in our current culture, there are, I think, two dominant ways to do that. One is by getting out of our heads, we get off our heads. So through alcohol, legal and illegal drugs, we find ways to kind of get out of our dominant way of thinking one way or the other through taking in substances. And a second way, which is very prevalent and you can see everywhere, is just through distraction. So when you watch TV, you can feel it gets you out of your head. There's a sort of a hypnotized experience. Louis C.K., that comedian, had this joke that you can see how hypnotizing TV is if you suddenly turn it off when your kids are watching it, their reaction is like there's a weird primal grunt, which is very similar to when you startle someone who's having a nap. When you see these YouTube videos of waking people up, all of a sudden there's a startledness. So the fact that that happens when we're watching TV shows that we're in this kind of hypnotic sleep, and I think people gravitate to that as a way of getting out of their thought process, out of the dominance of their thought. But these are distractions and numbing. They're not really getting out of our thoughts. They're just sort of fuzzying our thoughts a little, or suppressing our thoughts, or forgetting about our thoughts for a while. But they're not really an experience that's outside of that encompasses our thoughts. So what is? And for me, my own lived experience is through the process of meditation and mindfulness, I've begun to experience modes of consciousness or modes of awareness that don't involve the dominance of thought. And what's interesting about these modes of awareness is my thoughts don't necessarily disappear, or it's not like I'm in a non-thinking state, but it feels like I'm not identified with those thoughts, or I'm not in those thoughts where they're here and I'm just there. There's a sense of observation or awareness, because outside of my thoughts, I do have some awareness that I'm thinking, and my awareness of my thinking isn't my thinking. Now, if I start thinking about it, it is, but just that moment of being aware of something isn't the something that I'm aware of. So if thoughts are overrated, what isn't overrated, or what could play a stronger role in how I experience our day-to-day life? And in my experience, it's our awareness, our sense of being aware of what's going on rather than thinking about what's going on. And my experience up to this point, it's been very brief. I mean, I'm certainly not at any kind of high level, but I have had moments or glimpses in meditation and mindfulness practice where I feel very briefly I'm in a state of interior silence, where I just feel like I'm not in my thoughts, and I'm not numbing out, I'm not distracting, I'm actually quite present, I'm quite aware. There's a lucidity and a spaciousness and a kind of clarity to this. So it's not a fuzzy feeling, it's an awareness that has clarity to it. And I'm just at that few seconds or few moments, I'm not in my head, and it feels good. It feels different. It feels like it's an experience of being outside of my thought processes. And at the moment for me, it's very brief, it's very temporary, but it's enough to feel like, there is a way of operating and engaging with the world other than just thinking about stuff, other than analyzing and then identifying with those thoughts. So, I bump my foot, and it's not just the bumping of my foot, it's, oh God, you're stupid. It's like all the stories we attach to all our experiences, all the narratives we have in our mind, that we just chew over and over and over. And I wondered, that statistic of 40,000 thoughts a day, how many of those thoughts are original? How many of those thoughts are true? How many of those thoughts are based on the reality of what's going on rather than the story we have in our mind? And how many of those thoughts are we very identified with and attached to in a way that we feel that's who we are, like I am what I think, rather than I'm the awareness of what I think? So I think, and this is where it's very hard to kind of get away in communicating without mentioning the fact I'm thinking about things, but there's this understanding of there is more to experiencing ourselves outside of our thoughts. And that's really all I'm here to share, that saying thoughts are overrated requires we give some alternative to thinking without thinking about what that is. And for me at least, my only real lived experience of that is through a meditation practice, mindfulness practice, and an awareness that there is something in me that allows me to experience myself in this world that isn't my mind or my thinking process. And the more I build on that, the more it feels it allows me to be present, it allows me to be less anxious, and it just gives me a break from that incessant chatter that is tiring, that doesn't require me to numb out or distract, but it gives a kind of an experience of self and life that is different, and I feel like is enriching and interesting and lucid and clear. And I feel like that's something that I think we can all afford a little bit more of in our lives. So look, I hope this has helped. I hope this has made sense. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to comment on anything about this video, please, I'd love to hear from you. And take care of yourself. Bye bye.